What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpollia sitting on the couch making some money investing in fractional real estate online. As usual, today I am going over the Foxfire, which is Mogul's latest listing. It's a 7-bedroom, 8-bathroom, 4,800 square foot short-term rental in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We've seen several of these, several in this market recently. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the market, although I am going to just share you the AirDNA sub-market stats real quick. Just like I've talked about the last couple of videos, I have shortened the format that I'm using for these due diligence videos. I'm only going to try to talk about things if they kind of stand out, if I think they're important. And I'm not going to go through, a full-length due diligence like I have been doing. It doesn't mean that you should stop doing that, right? Like, you still want to look at the flood map, the crime map, verify that you think the income's correct, read all the documents. You still want to do everything. I'm just running out of time to cover everything that I want to on this channel, because there's a lot of different stuff going on in the fractional real estate space, lots more properties getting listed, and to be perfectly frank, I just have a lot of other stuff going on in life as well. So before I forget, please like and subscribe. In the description of this video, I have links set up to all the places where I'm currently investing in fractional real estate online. Just because I am investing on those platforms doesn't mean that you want to do your own due diligence on all of them. Some of them are affiliate links. Some will give you some money if after you make your first investment. You want to read those terms of service or all the fine print with that. Some of them you have to wait a while to get it. Some of them, Lofty's still I don't think is working, although they announced that it's going to be working soon. Although they said it was going to be working by the end of last year, and several other times. So I'm not sure when that's actually going to happen. But anyway, you just do your own due diligence on all of those. Just because I put them there doesn't mean that they necessarily work. Although so far for me, the only one that is problematic is Lofty's, but any of them can change. For a little while, Ground Floor was only paying you if you invested in the Flywheel portfolio. I don't know if that's still true or not. Also in the description of this video, I have links set up to a Discord where there's over 200 of us that are talking about fractional real estate investing across several different platforms. It's not a lead funnel. It's free to join. If anybody tries to sell you something in the DMs on Discord that looks like me, it's not me. Okay, back to this property. I think that's getting longer every time. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to get a lot of stuff out of the way there. So what do I like about this one? What's different about it? One thing, and maybe this has been in other contracts and I've missed it, but one thing that I like very much is to see that they included this language that all the property sold in turnkey condition with all furnishings, TVs, amenities as described in the rental listing. And they tell you what it excludes too, right? The linens that are, because a lot of times the property management companies own those, and the stuff locked within the owner's closets. And again, that's because it's probably owned by the property management company. It's where they keep their cleaning supplies and whatnot. They also, talk about assisting the buyer with coordinating existing Airbnb bookings. So, getting those turned over is important. And so that's great that they put that in there. And then also, that they're not stuck with that management company if they don't want to be, right? So, I don't know, I thought this was interesting. I've been looking for this language and haven't seen it in every contract. Maybe it's been there on some of them that I haven't noticed, but I was just very glad to see that this is included because it's important, right? I want to understand how we're paying for that. One of the things they didn't mention in the listing, if they have, actually maybe they put it somewhere else, because sometimes, this is telling you okay, nearby properties average between this, but they didn't tell you what it did last year, which often they will if it's an operating property. But I noticed the listing for sale, because this was bought on the market, mentioned that it generated $198,000 in gross rental income last year. So they are, underwriting a number that's below last year's number. I think that makes total sense, though, because if you look at this is the market data for the Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, the submarket Gatlinburg. You can see annual revenues down, occupancy rates are trending down. So this is, year over year trending downwards. So overall revenue per available room has trended down 3%. Well, if you look at our projection compared to that, in the 194,000, that's not 3% down from last year's, but I think that's not necessarily exactly what I would do, because this is showing the trend that was in effect. So I would think that impacted last year's number too, right? I'm actually gonna go into the valuation first, because this is one I want to get this out of the way somewhat quickly, but also share some. So this was, and I already have the Zillow listing up. So this estimate on this, 1,221,300. We have a purchase price of 1,275,000. So we're, Zillow thinks we're overpaying by a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit. $50,000. So relatively speaking, not a ton, right, compared to the purchase price, but it is a lot of money. One of the things you have to keep in mind, Zillow doesn't take into account that you're getting this as an operating business that's fully furnished. Although, it just picks up comparable sales, and I would assume a lot of the comparable sales were sold in a similar manner. So I don't know, it's relatively close, but not great. And again, because we're getting all that furniture, fixtures, and equipment, maybe 1.275 isn't actually overpaying. If you look at Redfin, the Realtor's estimate is 1.299999, but I think this often just gets changed to whatever the current list price is. Is that right? Because this is listed for sale. Or is it not? I thought it was. Well, yeah, on here, yeah, we can see it's active. And see, that's the list price. So I think Realtor does this a lot of times, where it just changes that estimate to exactly the list price. So I never really trust these ones when it shows it that it's, that the valuation is exactly the list price. I don't know. They tried to sell this one last year too for more, and it didn't sell. So I thought that was interesting. Redfin thinks 1.266. So that's really close, right? I mean, that's within $9,000 at this price point. I think that's close enough for me to not think, okay, we're definitely overpaying on this. One of the things I've talked a lot about is when you have these types of properties, that it's not always easy to, for the software to pick up the differences, right? Like it can't tell, well, this home has better views than this other home. This one's situated better on the land. It's maybe better access to the property and whatnot. And so a lot of times, those automated models for pricing stuff don't work great when you don't have a lot of the same properties. We're not in that exact situation here, though, because I thought this was pretty interesting. All of these are pretty similar. They're not identical, but they're all pretty similar. And so this is when we talk about the revenue, this is going to be important. So let's see. I think actually, yeah, this one I think is our subject property. This one's a little different because you can see this is enclosed, where on ours it's not. But when you come over to this one seems like it's maybe exactly the same. When you go down the street here, I don't love that these, the way this is maintained. Your guests are driving by that. It'd be ideal to put that behind a little fence or something, but it's not always possible. This one looks like it's the same one. Let's see. And then once we get down here, this is one that's got that, this is enclosed. It's not. Although it could be that they're just turned sideways, right? Like one of them, the way they're oriented. But this one looks exactly the same. I'm not sure. Because maybe if we were looking at it from this direction, it would look like that. And then that's the side of it. But there are several very, very similar properties that these programs could be pulling from to get that right. Although they think this one's worth 1.65, right? Where I think that might be the one with the enclosed part. Although this looks like 1.68, that it's the same. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think these always are perfect. This seems like an instance where it would do a better job than some of the other cabins that we've seen that are really unique. But it's certainly not as good as like when you just have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in a subdivision full of 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes. So as far as valuation goes, I don't think, I think you could argue that we're paying a reasonable price for this one, right? We're certainly not getting a deal, even though that, they're getting it below the list price. It doesn't look like we're getting some screaming deal, but at the same time, this is one, it doesn't appear that we're overpaying from that perspective. Now, from a revenue to price perspective, I don't like this. I've talked about this a lot with, short-term rentals, that in my market, I'm looking at high teens to, sometimes even 20% revenue to price ratio. So if I had, 194, 400, divided by 1275, this is 15. This is actually better than some of them we've seen from Mogul lately. That we saw some like in the 13s and 14s, I believe. 15 still strikes me as being a bit low. Like it is, and that's why we're getting a 7.9% cash on cash, which I don't think is fantastic for a short-term rental. That's their year one, and I think it's actually like 7.86 is what it is. They just don't, I know I've complained about this a lot with them lately. They just don't, like early on, they seem to be finding, like really digging up great deals. And these just strike me as like, I could go into this market and buy this property without a whole bunch of work, right? It was listed online, it was listed on the MLS. Okay, they negotiated a small discount. But this isn't, this doesn't seem like, the revenue to price ratio isn't great, especially in a market where you have declining occupancy rates, declining average daily rates. I just don't love it. I don't love it from a revenue perspective, especially because all of my short-term rentals on Mogul have been underperforming expectations. And some of them started with a, higher yield projection. And so I just want to have a wider margin of safety built into my yield, and it just doesn't feel like we have that here. Now they do still have, very large reserves, right? We've got a 5% vacancy reserve, 5% maintenance reserves. So we're still, and I think this closing cost is so expensive because there's probably like built into that getting the property converted over. There's going to be some expense there. The miscellaneous cost, this 5% is typically Mogul's fee. So I mean, there is a margin of safety. It's not as if the short-term rentals that I have with them, they haven't had to do capital calls or anything like that. But we've had several months on several of the properties with zero cash flow, very little revenue relative to what they expected. And so it does worry me when we're buying based on a projection that seems low initially. And then I wanted to get into also, the listing says there was $198,000 in revenue. When I plugged this property into AirDNA, I used 18 guests because the contract, it has a contingency that says, if we can't get a certificate of occupancy for at least 18 guests, we can back out. That's the number I used. The projected revenue is only $137,000, right? Versus $194 is what Mogul is projecting. I mean, that seems. Now, obviously, if the listing is correct and there was really 198,000, well, then just AirDNA is wrong. But I don't know that you can always trust. Hopefully, well, I guess. I still do, despite complaining about a lot of their listings lately, I still do think that the Mogul guys are very professional, that they're doing their own due diligence. Obviously, just because I trust them doesn't mean that you should. But I don't think that they're just taking numbers at face value without, getting, looking into the details, right? And typically when I'm buying or helping clients buy a short-term rental, we will get, if it's an active one, we'll get a hold of the printouts, basically showing what they received from the different, from Airbnb, VRB, all the different platforms. One of the things that could be happening in this market is, and this happens in markets that are very well established vacation rental markets, is a lot of the bookings happen directly through, either rebooking past guests or just through the manager's website instead of Airbnb and VRBO. And so those don't get picked up. It took me a little while to actually get the property that I think is the subject property, because, when we look at this, you have, all of these that, so this one, three of these came up as, as, with the AirDNA reports, but I believe this is the correct one. I think the pictures match and everything. And so this only knows about 102,600 of annual revenue with 344 days available. That strikes me as really odd if they made 198,000 in revenue. This is picking up AirDNA or Airbnb and VRBO, but usually if there's a lot of direct bookings, the days available will show lower because once it's booked, directly, they'll block it off on the calendar. So I'm not really sure why there's this huge discrepancy, but I also, 31% occupancy seems low. And I'm going to show you the other two that I found that are in that neighborhood. So this is another one, and it is the same exact size, right? It's the same 7-bedroom, 6.5. It looks like it's the same model that we were looking at. This one did, 117,000, and again with 358 days available. So it is, it really makes me wonder where the discrepancy is, right? Why we have 198,000, from the listing agent saying that's how much revenue it created, when okay. AirDNA thinks the subject property only did 102. It thinks this other one that's in that same subdivision only did 117. And then it does, and then this is another one. This is another one in the subdivision. It's the other one that is the same, looks to be the same layout. And this one, it's got us 158,000 in revenue. Although this was the one I thought was the subject property at first, although I don't think it is because this is listed as 8 bedrooms and ours is 7, but with 7.5 baths. So, it's tough to be completely sure. I mean, this one looks a lot like our property too, but I mean, all of them look pretty similar. So it's not the easiest to tell, and they don't always put this little dot right on it. But even, 158,000 and 352, we're still pretty far shy of the 198,000. And you can see 40% occupancy, 34% occupancy, 31% occupancy. And a lot of people will look at that and be like, oh, well, we have tons of nights where we can fill it up. But that's not really true in these markets that are really seasonal, right? Like I kind of expect this. Although if you look at the submarket as a whole, they say 58% occupancy. So it does seem like they could do better. And so maybe they are doing some direct bookings, but just for whatever reason, Airbnb or AirDNA is not picking up on the fact that they got pulled off the platform for those days. I'm really just not sure. But it worries me, right? Like I wasn't super excited at the 198,000. I think that's if that's really what it did last year, then predicting 194 makes sense. But if you look and see that all the comparables are doing even worse than that, it makes me worry when they're like, oh, well, we're projecting growth from here, where the submarket is shrinking. They're projecting that number to go up, where the trend is down, and all the comps seem to have I don't know. I really, especially once I saw the valuation on this one, I was like, maybe this is one I'm going to buy that's a short-term rental. But when I started digging into this, um, on the revenue side, for me, it's just too risky, right? Like they don't have a good track record with their short-term rentals so far, at least not with the ones that I've purchased. They're And then we're starting off with a lower revenue projection, relative to the price than some of the other ones that I had. And that's one of the things, I went into these thinking, okay, maybe in some other markets, it just doesn't need to be as high as as we have it here. And I'm starting to think, one, because our property tax is higher relative to the cost of the property. So, I think that eats into it, but I don't think that explains everything away. Like, I think 15% is probably really just too low to create a deal, revenue to price ratio, to create a deal that I'm excited about. And that has the type of margin of safety that I want to have in a short-term rental, especially one that has really, any sort of seasonality to it, right? Because, and I've talked about this before, but I get really scared when you have, although their calendar doesn't look, yeah, I guess you do, right? Like, wintertime is not great. February, December, January are not great months. Because when you have a really seasonal short-term rental, you run into problems of, okay, I missed, my peak months. I had some problem. I had a cancellation, and you just can't make it up, right? You just can't make up that lost revenue, like you could in markets that have a little bit smoother revenue. But anyway, that's really my, those are the things I have the most concern over. Just to recap the couple of things that I thought were interesting. One, they did put it in the contract that all the personal property is changing hands. So I was really glad to see that. The valuation, while not perfect, seems like it's it's close enough that I was actually really interested once I saw that to think, okay, this is going to be one that makes sense for me. On the revenue side, I'm just a little too worried about it, right? Like, I'd like to know more about why AirDNA is so far off from what the listing agent is saying, or the seller is saying they made last year. Because that's just a really big discrepancy. It's not one that I run into in my market. I can't think of ever seeing that where a seller had credible numbers, where they could provide backup, and that were so far off from what AirDNA was doing, except for when they had a lot of direct bookings and they had some evidence of that. So if that's what's going on, it'd be a good question to ask Mogul if you are interested in this one. It just seems like if that's, I guess it could be, if that's the case, it'd be interesting to see, okay, you could open up all these listings and see, are they all listed by the same manager? I don't know that they are or aren't, but, if they all have a similar amount of direct bookings because they're in this true vacation market and it's more common. I'm not really sure, but that's my main concerns. I'm curious if you're going to buy this one, give us a comment and tell us why. If you're not going to, is it for similar concerns? Were there other things that you saw? And then also, in addition, part of why I'm going to try to do these shorter due diligence videos is I'd rather just respond to specific concerns or questions that anybody might have about these properties. So if anybody has looked into this and they have, if there's certain topics that you think, hey, let's really talk about this, drop that question in the comments or jump in the Discord and let me know. Because I'd like to make sure that I'm not just, droning on about things that are interesting to me, but nobody else cares about. Anyway, that is it for me for today. Until next time, I'm going to keep making mistakes so that you don't have to.